The global economy is quietly being rewritten, not in boardrooms, but beneath the Earth's surface. Mining has become a critical focal point for industries, countries, and ecosystems. Africa as a continent sits at the heart of the mining conversation. And to take a look at this, we're going to be unpacking the true potential that lies beneath Africa's surface and how it is we unlock that potential. Getting the thoughts of some experts in this mining space and taking a look at what this potentially means for mining on the African continent. Thapelo, Abe, thanks so much for joining me. Thanks for giving of your time. And thanks for engaging on this conversation, because a lot of the conversations we have in the mining space are centered around an external view into South Africa, or into the African continent rather. This is a conversation that allows us to then put forward what is happening on the African continent, and I think it's an important narrative that needs to be shared. Thapelo, perhaps you can set us up and get us going with an overview of how it is that we arrived to what the mining landscape looks like today.
Oh, fantastic. Thanks, Jimmy. So when you look at the mining sector over the past years, I remember in 2018, I think there was a big article and that said mining is a sunset industry. But when you really think about it now and what we're seeing, definitely that's not true, right? So where we are is that mining is a sunrise. And let me just unpack that a little bit. So we've seen thematics around increased demand for minerals. Africa, as an example, accounts for between 20 and 30% of global reserves, right? And we can talk about the different metals. PGMs, as an example, we host almost between 65 and 70% of PGMs. In South Africa, when you look at cobalt in DRC, almost 80%, and of course has made a lot of people quite anxious. I saw in the news yesterday, DRC has overtaken, I think, it's Peru is now the second largest exporter of copper, right? So that tells you something, that there's a lot of activity that's happening on the continent. So then you can talk about the likes of manganese, which we host again 80% of world's resources. You talk about chrome. It's interesting, I looked at data in the past. You would see that the rise of steel production in China coincides with exports of materials out of South Africa, and the two key materials being chrome and manganese. So what that means is that Africa, SA, is quite central to world economy. It's important to go back to the idea that metals have always been very key for industrialization. We in Gauteng, and we know the history of Gauteng, which basically we found gold, and that led to the development of the economy. We have different sectors at the moment, and that's really was supported on the back of mining. When you look back again on the things like renewables energy, mining accounted for almost 70% of all those renewables energy projects, which is quite remarkable. So mining is quite central. It's central in Africa, it's central in the global context. And at thematics, what we're seeing is that the governments are starting to talk around, what does this mean for us? As an example, one of the fascinating things is that, if you look at China or Europe, someone will say cobalt is important for batteries. But we're seeing in Africa is saying cobalt is important for us in as far as it leads to battery manufacturing on the continent. So those are some of the thematics that we're seeing, big investments that are coming into the continent. Of course, there's key commodities that we're looking to invest in. But of course, as we all know, there's not always that perfect story, right? So there are key challenges that we've had to navigate.
Gentlemen, let's talk critical minerals.
I wanted, Jimmy, before we move, right? So I think one of the fascinating things we see, probably you've seen this as well, we're seeing money from Saudi Arabia, as an example, come onto the continent. So the M&A question, there's a lot of money that's coming in. China, I think, almost accounts for 50% of investments on the continent. You see now Middle East money coming in, As an example, again, we've seen that in Zambia when there was, purchase into the copper assets there. We've seen in Botswana, Kamakau, with the Chinese investing in there. So there's a lot of this, capital that's flowing into the continent, which is quite exciting. But not only that, right? Because then, we've seen with the Trump administration in the US, also now there is a focus around, hey, have we missed an opportunity to invest on the continent? And we start seeing that. So that makes it very exciting because now you have all these pools of investments or capital coming on the continent looking for opportunities, So it's really an exciting moment to be in.
Gentlemen, before we get to opportunity sets and how that is shaping the continent, let's talk critical minerals. Let's talk where we're seeing the demand and how it's playing out. Because as Abe mentioned, we go through the cycles, and in one cycle, something might be more popular than in another cycle. We've seen that practically play out over the life of mining. How are we seeing critical minerals shaping the conversations at the moment?
Can I set a tone there?
Go for it.
And the reason I'm doing that, because sometimes we might get caught up in the buzzwords and lose the basics of it. So when we were studying fiscal science in matric, for the ones who did fiscal science, there was a periodic table there that is got like elements, and at the grade 12 level, you stop at 20, and then when you go up to varsity, you would go up to other elements, right? And that periodic table was separated into metals and non-metals and all of those. At that point, people are not understanding it's just element. We're just cramming it. Number one is hydrogen, number two is nitrogen, and all of those, right? And to a point where you start to get to varsity, you realize there's a platinum there in the same periodic table, right? You then grow on further in your levels, then they tell you about PGMs. Oh, so this is what we're talking about starting from that, right? And then you then hear the words like byproducts. Now you grow further. You understand that when we mine platinum, we're not getting only platinum. Within the platinum, there's a group, there's a palladium, there's iridium, there's all of those. Oh, now it's starting to grow. You get to the use of it, and then it gives you an idea again that says, oh, this is used as a catalyst. Oh, so it's important. You grow up a bit, you start working, you realize, oh, the price is sitting at this one. And as soon as the price go up and the mines get opened, oh, that's PGM. At that point, there's no critical mineral weight. It doesn't exist, right? Oh, it's there, but it's not used. It's not used, right? And then you start learning the ore bodies. Within the platinum, you get chrome, you get this, there's a geology of it, you now understanding. Now, economics and everything in the talks start developing to say, but we can group this as critical. So which ones are we now putting as critical? Now, decision get made and say, PGMs get critical because for this economy to grow, that platinum which was there in a periodic table, there it is now that you're finding it there. Now we call it critical, all right? Don't lose yourself. It's still the same platinum, but it's now grouped because it's critical for this use to develop an economy.
I think that's important context, Abe, because when we think about critical minerals, more often than not, we don't know what to lump it into. And what our economy might consider critical, a more mature economy might not, or an economy that's focused on other areas for themselves from a mining perspective might not consider that critical because they might not have an abundance of that resource. So I think that context is very, very important. But then where does that leave the conversation for the African continent, Apello, because we're seeing so many resources on the continent, and as you rightly mentioned at the start of the conversation, we have no shortage of resources. So how then do we start to classify them?
Maybe to go back to what ABS has been saying, it's fascinating, even the idea of critical minerals. I mean, you've correctly said that actually, this idea evolves, right? So, in the 1940s, in 1948, America came out with the definition, critical minerals for weapons, or ammunition and all that. So this is an evolving definition. We looked at, lists across, different countries, US, Japan, Europe and China. What is fascinating is that there's no one definition of what critical. If you look at the lists in Europe, it's long, probably 30 metals. Japan, similar, China. Actually, China talks about strategic minerals instead of critical minerals. I saw yesterday, actually, there's a NATO also came out with a critical minerals list. So there's no one definition. Right? So what has happened is that you have a list from the kind of consumer minerals countries, right? So that actually don't have abundance of these materials, and they're looking for those materials. And you have producers of these minerals who are also saying, well,
I like that you bring that up, Tapelo, around beneficiation, because that is the critical question here, right? Around mining on the African continent. And I want to get your thoughts on that, Abe, because from a producer perspective, especially as Tapelo drew that distinction between the consumer and the producer, Africa sits squarely as the producer, purely on the basis of the amount of resource that we have. We need to talk about how these minerals benefit our ecosystems and our economies. And I want to get your thoughts on how that then starts to shape the exploration conversation. We touched on, obviously, this less skilled miners, the semi-skilled miners, and that growth path that you follow as you see the mining participants come in. But how is the conversation of beneficiation now shaping how those new entrants come into the space?
Okay, quite a good one, quite an interesting one, especially looking at the challenges that we're facing in South Africa, right? And those challenges could be similar, if not worse, up there in Africa. So the most differentiator and the success of beneficiation lies within power generation. And if we don't have a balance there and consistency in power generation, and our beneficiation will drop. And then we're going to continue to ship out, call it untreated, run-of-mine concentrates in our terms, right? Until we get that element okay. But then therein lies the challenges. And if then the beneficiation is not sorted, I'm talking now the current ones which are struggling, then the new ones will even struggle more to come up. Then the producers, which are the new entrances of new mine owners that have got new permits, new licenses, they will then link straight to China. And China will come first because they're going to process a bit cheaper than what we process in South Africa. So if anything, we probably need a political stability that would make sure that the whole value chain is owned. We're struggling as it is from exploration because the exploration piece there is actually searching for new commodities, right? That is the first value chain, linking it up to the end of beneficiation. We seem to be struggling with the exploration piece. Data system is still not working from a DMRM side, okay? We're now good with the mining itself, excavation, and then we stop at that. Yeah, we can push it a bit to the process of it. And then when you get to beneficiation, we drop again. Oh. So we're not owning the whole value chain, but yet we've got a source. So how will that then shape going forward? It might be a bottleneck, it might be a retract, it might be a way of saying, let's continue as normal. We're struggling to put new plants. It gets a bit expensive to even put a new smelter. Let's even ship over. Oh. Bear in mind, the smelter, when it runs, it cannot be stopped. You can't switch it off. It's not switching on and off. So it has to left running. If you run it at a higher price, then you can imagine what's the business case sitting. Oh. If one mining house that is sitting with Tapelo, and I'm always going to reference that so that the context is clear there from the banking perspective, he would have the whole value chain from mining in most cases up until the beneficiation. And his revenue will then be flow down from after beneficiation. But then the graph steeps up a bit on this side. Then it doesn't make sense for him to leave it open without mentioning who. Then he would rather than mine and export and close down, you know. I'm a new entrant in mining, then I want to start in. Then my question is, am I going to treat my ore? Am I going to ROM? Let me ship out.
Mm-hmm. Can I just add on the exploration piece? I mean, I was quite surprised. I think it was just around October. I saw data that actually shows South Africa now is the third largest spend on exploration on this, and it's very particular commodity around the rare earths. I was surprised because, we've always had the narrative and the message, and we've seen the numbers that actually our exploration spend has actually declined, right? But again, with this idea of critical minerals, there is now a focus around, actually, we do have rare earths on the continent in South Africa, from what I understand, north of SA to the border of Namibia, there's some rare earths. I think Angola has, so there is a bit of an increase in exploration for particularly the rare earths, to say, how big are they on the continent? I know, as an example, in the mineral sands space, you find that, we've been mining the mineral sands, but there is some portion of rare earths. So I think there is a bit of that encouragement to spend a little bit more to find those minerals. I mean, as you know now, also with Zimbabwe, with lithium, the numbers I've seen was indicating that Zimbabwe might be the biggest producer of lithium on the continent. So we're seeing a bit of that heavy investment. But again, maybe it's important to say it's on those. But in existing minerals that we've been mining for decades, for centuries, you do find that perhaps the exploration fund is not as big. But what is encouraging, you would know, last year there was a big signing for the exploration fund by the IDC and the DMRE, and subsequent to that, Anglo has come in, pledged, I think, additional 700 million. So it does look like what the government had done to say, let's take the first bite, we'll put the fund, and many other players are coming in, to say, actually, you can use money, you can put a bit of money on the pot, just explore a little bit further. I've started doing some work with, the different agencies that the government has put in. At the MinTech is part of that group that was leading the charges around, this critical minerals and again, that exploration issue. But if you ask me, we need to do more. There needs to be a lot more money into the exploration space.
Just before you jump in, to add to Tapelo's, geoscience has been a custodian of all these ore bodies within the whole South Africa, right? You'd be surprised if I were to tell you that the ore bodies in South Africa have been mapped before. So the info is there. To what detail has been a question, right? So in areas where you would find the gold deposit, the concern at the time or the need was to find gold. But if you go deeper into the detail that was drilled even 100 years ago, there is more into there to analyze, And that whole info is sitting with geoscience. And they are now tasked to remap the whole of South Africa, and have a data that would say, these are where the rare earths are. I was with them at one of their presentations where they were showing specifically on the Northern Cape, which is predominantly manganese and iron ore, right? But according to their info, the whole of Northern Cape has got rare earths, untapped. The graph in the map in there, you'll see the whole area has got dots and dots, filled of rare earth, again untapped. Geoscience have done all that data sitting there. To Tapelo's point, if we can do more, invest in that, then we can open up new entrants. And we move that sunset more 100 years backwards.
So rare earths used to be like the backup singers, right? Now they've been called to
lead singers.
To be the lead singers, and it's like, wow.
You set us up perfectly, Tapelo, for somewhat the elephant in the room, and that's financing, right? And I want to take a look at that in the context of the African continent, in the context of what you mentioned, Abe, around the need for exploration to own the value chain. We already know the cost of financing of the mining component. We're discovering the costs of financing of the beneficiation. We know the costs of financing for exploration isn't necessarily a fun cost to incur, for lack of a better term, but it is a necessary cost if we are to own that value chain. How do you then start to shift the collective focus on how you finance the value chain, how you empower the entry-level mining house or the experienced mining house that is potentially looking to venture into a new area to start mining. How does the finance conversation start to happen?
Maybe I can venture and we will add. What is fascinating, as I looked at the data again that says, from exploration down to beneficiation. I mean, the fascinating case study is China, right? So as I talked about steel that, export chrome, manganese, you get a final product, comes back. We had a similar thing, right? I spoke about ISCO. So mining could be about 20-25% value. And then you beneficiate another probably 20%, but as you go down the value chain, you add value. But remember us as a bank, we are enablers. We finance ideas. You come to us and say, here's an idea, so as our tagline goes, our motto, Africa is our home. We lead her growth. So we are facilitators, but at the heart of it, be it REITs, be it critical minerals, be it beneficiation, it has to make sense at the very fundamental level. Because for us, we're not banking the ideas in that sense. We bank the ideas that says, okay, show us your idea in a financial model. Does it make money? Is the cash flow sufficient to actually be able to support the financing? So of course mining is technical and all, but it's no different to how you would fund any other sector, consumer, industrial, and all that, right? It is expensive. However, what we have seen, so as an example, you produce chrome ore, right? You get X. If you beneficiate that value, it multiplies 6 to 10 times, tenfold, right? But of course, you're sitting with a different risk. Now you've produced a product, whereas if you're doing ore, you sell into this guy who beneficiates, processes that. So at the heart of it, we need to be convinced that does it make money? And you can make a case that say, if you map the whole value chain, you can argue that there is value. But if you just put it in the middle, beneficiation, it's hard, as we've seen, as I was talking about the electricity issue. We've looked at the data and looked at smeltering, refinery capacity across different commodities, PGM, gold, chrome, manganese, Interestingly, again, if you go back to history in South Africa, we had that template perfect. We're beneficiating manganese, we still beneficiate in the PGM space and the ferrochrome space, and now there is a solution that's going to be on the table. But I think for us, the fundamentals needs to stack up.
It must be bankable.
It must be bankable. Because remember now, from banking perspective, we have a wide range of solutions, right? So I was doing the chat with Engineering News. It's fascinating. When we thinking about exploration and all these things, it's normally financing. But there's other solutions, right? So one of the interesting solutions could be you take the exploring company, you take them to a strategic investor who can put money, fund that period of exploration up to BFS, right? Bankable feasibility study, and move it up the value chain, right? Because I think at the heart of it, we understand it's high risk, and mining, it's hard in that, as Abi says, it's geology. If you drill the wrong place, you can be 1 centimeter, 2 centimeters away from the ore, but you've drilled the wrong place. That money is as good as gone. So there is a bit of that risk. And again, given our role as a financier, we want to get to a point where we say, unfortunately, we at the stage we bank the cash flows. Of course, you have project finance, which basically looks at the project on its own. But again, it has to be at the BFS stage. So some things that we could explore, Jimmy, is to say you have, development financial institutions that can, get involved, and we know the likes of GBSA, IDC, they get involved where you help at that stage. You notice the history of Palabo as an example, which was fully funded, established by IDC back in the days. So there is a template that you can, you take forward. So the way I see it is the bank is part of the ecosystem that can solve this thing. We have an M&A team that can say, well, okay, you have this thing. Let's meet you with Jimmy, who has a bit of cash. He doesn't know what to do with it. He can put it here, take a bit of a risk, develop this thing, get to a certain stage.
I think it's important to, as we look at the financing conversation, I get the sense that risk is the second part or almost the precursor to bankability, because if there's too much risk, then it might not be worth pursuing. If we can mitigate those risk factors, as you rightly mentioned, then it starts to become something more palatable or something worth exploring. Excuse the pun there. Yes. But from a risk perspective, and as we look at it, perhaps another perspective or an alternative could be that we need to rethink how we approach that risk.
Part of what we look at, where I sit, is to look at the project risk before we put in the finance in it, right? And I guess that's why I'm here, just to look at specifically of that. If you put the finance element before the other part, which is the project risk engineering piece of it, and the numbers could say no, and it is a no, and then you become risk averse, right? If you wear a different cap that says projects are risky, all of them, okay? There's no project that does not overrun, okay? Are we then interested to be in project? Answer is yes. So then let's stop a bit with finance and unpack what could happen in this project and how are we mitigating that in this project, right? And if the approach comes from that angle, it becomes a bit softer. It comes with a context, a different context before financing comes in, and then it can cross the line. But it has to be substantiated by somebody who has been there, somebody who can say, it's possible that can happen. They're going to hit this bottleneck. We can take a risk, but let's mitigate it even from the start. Then we know what we're getting ourselves into, right? I've seen a success in that approach. And I suppose that's why within the bank, especially on the BCB side, we've got sectors of specialists, non-bankers, specialists who are there to look at projects from a different angle and put in a different flair that would put the team to ease that says it is possible, even in that high risk.
Gentlemen, as we conclude this particular conversation, because this is in reality just the beginning of the mining conversation on the African continent, I want to get your thoughts around walking that journey. You touched on it quite a bit, Abe, around how you're doing that with your clients, but from not just from a banking perspective, but from positioning the African continent. It's clear we are the go-to resource for the world. It's clear we have a need for beneficiation on the continent for the benefit of the continent, not any individual country, not any individual mineral, but for the continent as a whole. So how then does the conversation move forward from a positioning perspective when we look to take these opportunities to the global stage?
Yeah, so look, I mean, it's an interesting question. Our commitment as a bank, as a team, is that we encounter our clients. We understand their story, their mission, what they're trying to achieve, and we journey with them. We partner with them. And again, as I said, most times we think about finance, but there's a lot more. There's trade finance, strategic advisory work that we do. we walk that journey. But of course, on the other side, we have governments that, we are in South Africa, we are in Africa. So we listen, we formulate relationships with governments, understand their passion, where directionally they want to take things, So we take the two together, and many other stakeholders, of course, investors in our own business as a bank. And again, so the question around beneficiation, we're fully aware. As you said, it's not only a SA story, and Namibia has the same thing. They've kind of kept, exports of raw material. Zimbabwe has done the same. So, we understand, we're on the ground on that stuff. So it's really a delicate, journey that because remember, we're not just advocates. We serve our clients, we serve our shareholders. So it's a journey that we try to manage delicately.
So I think Mineral Council it's good at what you're trying to I'm trying to respond to, selling Africa properly. What they do, they put all of us together as a Mineral Council, right? And say, these are the potential, there's an endowment, mineral endowment of South Africa, of Africa, okay? And this is what we can offer the world, right? So the approach should be in a partnership form. Commercial banks will have to be close with the Mineral Council, which is what we drive at the moment, to be part of them in their rodeo, in their talks. And so we're there to support, okay? We then pull the mine owners into it and say, we are there. We pull the contracting piece into the game and go together to the world and say, we're ready. We actually even not ready to mine only because we've been mining for over 100 years. We perfected the game, right? We're stepping up into a different game now because we've got a backup of Standard Bank, okay? And we've got a backup of our mineral endowment. We've got a backup of government here. The MRP is part of us, right? We recognized all the bottlenecks that we faced in the last 4 years. We made mistakes. We know about our mistakes. We're here now. Now we're selling ourselves differently. We've trained a lot of professionals at VET. We've trained a lot of professionals at UP, mining professionals for that matter. We've absorbed almost all the sectors within mining, from health to anything that you can think of that is linked to mining. So we're now running the show, if you understand how big this mining is. If we then sell ourselves as that, I believe we can shake everyone. Exactly after noticing that we could have made mistakes. We're here where we are now because of the mistakes. But going forward, this is what we are, right? And then we're not selling ourselves differently. The one side is saying a different tune to the other side. But I think if the government can lead us into that, which I think they're doing the right things, especially on this artisanal mining that they're trying to develop. Question is, at what speed are we doing? Not lip servicing. Banking is a very critical one. They wouldn't bank lip service or just a dream. So it has to be something really tangible that can be banked going forward. But to close it, partnership into this. And I think going to mining in Indaba, even going forward, this is all the forums where we put partnership forward and make sure together we grow in this.
I've always said, we are enablers, right? So if we really look at that journey, as Abhi was talking about, some of the challenges that we've had in the past, the banks have been at the forefront of financing that, the renewable energy project, right? So as Standard Bank, you would have seen in 2022, we said we're going to raise about 250 billion for renewable energy. And we've, 2026, we said 450, right? So again, trying to solve that. Because when you solve that energy issue, you get involved. We have different other sectors that really gets involved there. You unlock that, it helps the mining companies, right? So it helps it for the country. The Transnet issue. So as you know, there's the work stream around third-party access, allowing private sector to participate with Transnet. Again, we're participating in that. We have an infrastructure team that looks at that. So as a bank, whilst I'm talking for mining, but really it's really an ecosystem, as I said, that seeks to unlock this. If you unlock the infrastructure question, you make it possible for beneficiation to happen, right? So as a bank, as a financier, again, our motto is to enable, right? So clients say, well, these are the problems that we're experiencing, and we get involved to say, okay, can we find a solution? Is there a solution? So that's our value in unlocking value for clients. But at the heart of it, we're passionate about what our clients are trying to achieve. How do you help them? It's not just money. It's really a little bit broader than that.
It is an ecosystem, and I think that's the perfect note to leave the conversation on, because in looking at that ecosystem, it is a clear message from the Standard Bank Group, from the mining sector on the African continent, that if we are to unlock Africa, it is to make sure that that ecosystem thrives within and of itself. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for your insights, and I look forward to taking this conversation further.
Fantastic.
Fantastic.
Jimmy, thanks for talking to us.